Oh, here we go.
All right.
Chief, how
How's
are
it
you doing
going?
today? It's going. I can say that. Probably a little busier on your desk than it is on mine, but yes, it is
All is
going.
good. Good to see you. I'm excited to do this.
Brother, I've been waiting to talk to you and pick your brain. I know every time I see you, I talk to you and pick your brain.
Well,
And I
that's
thought,
cool. You've been running into a lot of each other lately. That's a good thing.
hey, I've got to catch your talk twice, and both times I could not take notes fast enough. And I appreciate the ability to take pictures of your slides. And
Well,
that's one of the great things. Of course, you say that at the beginning of when you start talking. Let me get this pulled back up real quick. My computer restarted right when we started, so I lost the
oh,
notes. There we go. There we go. No, you say that you built your slides with the express purpose of allowing people to take pictures of them and capture the germ. And that's such a boon nowadays with technology. So very plugged in.
well, what's mine
So
is yours, man. I'll share whatever I have.
it's awesome. I got a lot of stuff I want to talk to you about today, and I'm glad to get you here. And I know you got a lot on your plate with everything going on in the American Fire Service and America in general. So I'll jump right into it. Go ahead and introduce yourself for anybody who may not know, and give us your quick 30-second intro.
All right. My name is Scott Thompson. I'm currently the fire chief in the Colony, Texas. We're a suburb just north of Dallas. We're surrounded by Frisco, Plano, Louisville, Carrollton here in Denton County. I've been in the fire service. I graduated from my first academy in October of 1981. I started my career in Plano, Texas in January of 1986. I've jumped around a little bit. I worked in Plano for many years. I went from there to Arlington, Texas to be their first one and only outside training chief. Never wanted to be a fire chief, but I had the opportunity to go to Athens, Texas, very small town. Came back to the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex as the chief of Lake Cities. Went to work for Rick Lasky as his training chief for 10 years, and then retired from Louisville and took the Colony job. And I've been in the Colony for 11 years. I got two boys on the job. One of them is in Dallas, and one of them is in Arlington, Texas. So you're up to date.
There it is. So legacy. I wanted to ask you, because I didn't know this the first time I met you, that you were Rick Lasky's training chief. Is he a mentor basically of yours, or would you say a peer?
Oh, absolutely. He's a friend, number one, a role model, and yes, a mentor. One of the great experiences that I've had is prior to going to work from Rick, I had very much of a Texas and a West Coast operational influence. And going to work for Rick as his training chief forced me to really relearn the fire service. I was 27 years in or so, and I really had to relearn a lot of things because he does a lot of stuff East Coast. And so
Okay.
I had to really hit the books and ask questions. So that was a great experience for me. And yeah, Rick has mentored me in a lot of ways. He's a tremendous leader. He's a huge supporter of training. And I just got to tell a quick story. I was sitting there my first day on the job, and I said, hey, boss, I don't know how you do things. And he told me something that I always remembered. He says, listen, as long as you take care of the guys, we'll figure the rest out. And so that's what we did. And we had 11 years together. And Louisville is a very well-respected department. And so it was a great time.
That's some powerful advice too, and it really gets to the germ of it all.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
that's awesome. No, his book was one of the books that kind of changed the trajectory of my fire service career from being just kind of there to being checked in and plugged in and excited. So
And you know what? He lives everything he writes. I mean, what you read about Rick is the way he is. He's the full deal. And a lot of times you'll meet people and they're one way to how they present themselves, maybe in a public area. But what you read in his books is what he is. He lives it
That's
every
awesome.
day. Yeah,
That's
yeah.
awesome. All right, I'm going to jump right into this book, which I don't know
All
if you can see
right.
all my notes and things, and if you look at it, it's highlighted up with the tips for success. I almost emailed you and asked if you had this in like a printable format, the tips for success managing the chosen culture. because it's broken up on 2 pages and I couldn't just photocopy it.
Mm-hmm.
So instead I went and typed it out for myself, and it hangs on my locker now. That's how much those tips were, that really hit home with me, and I try to read it every day and apply it every day. Now, the success of that we'll see, but this healthy culture versus a neglected culture list, I've had so many people, I say just read that and see which side of the list you fall on. And that will tell you a lot about whether what you're doing is on purpose or if you're just accidentally falling into what you got. And so this chapter to me is, like I said, if you can see all of the sheer amount of highlights. So that chapter, Don't Neglect the Culture, to me is, I read it and go, is it really that simple? And if it is, how come so many people swing in this?
Well, first of all, I don't think people understand the full influence of culture. And it took me a while to learn it. I finally became a huge student of organizational culture, and occupational cultures of the American Fire Service. But I think a lot of people discount the influence of culture because you really can't see it. It's kind of hard to measure. And it's one of those things, kind of like morale and all those, we just put it aside. But every organization has a culture, and you have 2 choices. You can accept the culture that's going to exist, and every organization has one, and hope it's a good one, or you can take control of that and create a culture of choice. When I came into the Colony Fire Department, I made that decision to commit to a chosen culture. And I could spend hours and hours and hours telling you how that's paid dividends doing that. So, I think, number one, to answer your question, people just really don't believe in it. I've had chiefs tell me, oh, the culture's a lot of hocus pocus. And my next question is, well, how's your turnover? Tell me what your organization looks like. And it's pretty obvious. But it is, without a doubt, the most influential thing in our organization. And you can see in the book, one of my top 3 things to do every day, one of those is manage the culture daily. And I believe it's that important. So to me, it's essential to success. Now, it's the difference between being good and being great. A lot of fire departments just go with the culture that's in place, and they get by and they're okay. But I can tell you, they're not hitting on all cylinders. They're not reaching their maximum potential and providing the environment for the men and women in the organization to really thrive.
When you were in Stillwater earlier, 2019, and you told the story, and I wanted to touch base with you on this because you were doing your spiel, and you told the story about you went into a fire station and there was something that was off, and you couldn't quite put your finger on it, and then so you pulled a senior guy to the side and said, hey, what's going on? And he told you, hey, Chief, that before you could, that to me speaks volumes for how connected a fire chief can be to go into a station and feel like there's something off. So go ahead. Sorry.
Well, we did something called the Colony Project, which really gave us tremendous insight into our organization. And we looked at our people. We looked at the formal things that influence the organization, policies, procedures, laws, and regulations, the informal things, which is culture, and then threats, and then opportunities and ideas. And we did the same thing on the fire ground. We had the May Day on August 20th. We were able to break that operation down because it was all objective based and really look at what went right and what went wrong. Well, the same thing, we do the same thing with the culture. We understand the organization and the personality of the organization to such a degree because we broke it down and built it back that just like when we go on a fire, we could say, we can do better. That didn't go the way it should. The same thing is with our day-to-day in the organization, and it's very easy. We only have 4 stations. We're not a big organization. We have 80 members. But to go in and know when things, and maybe a little exaggerated, maybe not day to day, but certainly week to week, when the climate, the morale, and when I sense that, the first thing I do is I ask myself, man, what kind of bonehead thing did I do? Did somebody perceive something? And when I've gone to my senior guy a couple times, said, listen, I can't figure it out. Something's up. And they'll say something like, hey, Chief, that memo you sent out 2 weeks ago, man, that had a tone of mistrust. And I'm a big believer in two-way trust. I think that's something we got to fix in the fire service, where administration trust operations and operations trust administration.
Oh yeah.
And they'll just say, hey, Chief, it may not have been intentional, but your tone was like you don't trust us, or we're better than that, Chief, and you should know that. And man, that's what I need to hear. And so I don't give up until I figure out what's going on. And in the last 11 years, many times I've had to sit back and close the door and really, start with a clean and say, okay, what's going on here? And then once we can identify, that's very easy to fix.
Okay.
But sometimes it's a little uncomfortable. You sometimes you hear something maybe you don't want to hear.
Sure.
But if you don't address it, those little things become institutional problems. Morale issues always grow bigger and bigger and bigger, and pretty soon they can have a negative impact on the culture. So if, as a fire chief, I want this chosen culture, I want to create an environment that the men and women of the Colony Fire Department can be successful and survive in and thrive. I've got to, it's like an old 4-barrel carburetor. You're constantly, it's either too rich or too lean. You want to get it just right. And so I believe that fire chiefs need to understand their organizations to that level. And if you do, you can prevent things. I know I can name several fire departments, that used to be up here. They were the place that everybody wanted to go. And a year or two later, now they're the place that everybody's leaving. And I can guarantee you there were always signs and symptoms that existed where if the fire chief, the ops chief, battalion chief, or company officer knew what to look for, they would stop that negative or direction and start taking action to correct the problem and get the organization back on fast forward.
Nice.
Right.
Now, a question I have for you, because you are very deliberate about your culture, and you are very active in being involved in it. And so one question I have, because I know this is a problem or an obstacle for chiefs or people in charge, is you put so much effort and care and work into it, and then you mess up a little bit or put out a memo that doesn't quite ring of trust. It feels like you took 10 steps backwards. It's like the punishment is way worse than all the effort that's put in. Is that something you just have to accept, or does the trust bank build?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. It does every day, and it takes a while to get there, and you got to be patient. And to sidestep a little bit, but one of my greatest frustrations that I have today is I still have a few members who probably don't trust me to the degree that the rest of the organization does. And I've had conversations with those people, and I said, hey, what have I ever done to betray your trust? What reason have I ever given you? And they're, oh, nothing, Chief, it's just firemen being firemen. So I think now, 11 years into this, the organization as a whole has enough trust, and it goes both ways. The same as if one of our guys does something, that we get some buys. The respect you earn on your good days is going to determine the forgiveness you get on your bad days.
Right.
And so, but it also depends on the severity. Was it intentional? Was it meant to be mean or deceptive? That's one thing. If it was an accident, yeah, we get past that pretty quick and move on. But we got to learn from it. You can say sorry, and that carries a lot of weight, but that can't always be your default. Eventually, if you're saying sorry all the time, or I messed up all the time, then you got to have a look in the mirror and figure out, because of my deep voice, I come across as very intimidating. And I think that sometimes causes me problems. I like to think out loud. I like to sit at the firehouse table and just talk about the future. But I've got to remember that if the fire chief says it, a lot of times that's perceived as that's what's going to happen. And so I got to kind of manage that. But yeah, sometimes it stings. Most of the time I'm disappointed in myself, and I'll say, hey, I know better than that. And two-way trust is like the culture. You gotta tend to that every day if you truly want to have it. and you gotta nurture that, and you can never take the culture or trust for granted.
Granted. That's powerful, man. I love, like I said, that is my favorite chapter that I'm on my second read through. My first read through, I just read it. My second read through, I go through with my highlighters. Then I go through with notes. And so I'm going through with highlighters now. And phenomenal. I cannot say enough about the book. When I first got it, I was like, man, this isn't very big. You know, I'm used to the big fire engineering textbook.
Yeah,
But it is so meaty. And then I heard that it was deliberate, that you could put it in your bag. You made it this size on purpose. So anyway, I'll quit singing the praises
I
of the
wish
book.
I could have. You know, one of the things Rick George and his gang were able to do is make theirs a little cheaper. I had no say on the price, and right now it's priced a little bit out of what I think a lot of firefighters can afford, and I wish I had some way to remedy that. But probably as it goes on, I'm sure the price will come down a little bit. And I sell it on my website try to sell it for a little cheaper. But that's one of the things I would like to maybe fix someday.
Gotcha. No, but it's very quality as far as the put together.
Thank you.
It is a nice, I'm not a print expert by any stretch, but it's got weight.
Neither am I.
Weight to it.
Well, thank you.
We're moving on to the value of standards. And you got preparedness standards, performance standards, operation standards, and leadership standards that you list and talk about. When most people have trouble defining standards, you got them broken down into 4. So talk about standards for a minute, their importance to you and the importance to the functional fire company.
Well, the first thing you got to understand is, and I've heard firefighters say this time and time again, let's say they have 5 stations and run 3 shifts. They'll say, man, we got 15 different ways of doing things. Well, that right away tells me they don't have any standards. And if you don't have standards, I don't know what you train to. I don't know what you use as a leadership guideline, all those things I mentioned, a preparedness standard. And these things about standards is they can be recognized, they can be defined, they can be measured, they can be improved, they can be demonstrated. So if you remove all that, if you just have practices, principles, well, they're always going to be different. So one of the only ways that you can achieve a chosen culture is to have standards. And so one of our biggest standards is preparedness standards. And like I said, you could probably call anybody in the Colony Fire Department today and say, what is the most important thing to you today? And they're going to probably say to be mentally, physically, mechanically, and procedurally prepared. It all's got to start there. So you know, that's one standard. Then we have a lot of performance standards, everything from our 1 3/4 lines to 2.5 to being IRIT ready, our 0 impact period, setting a tower ladder, all those things we're actually defining, and we come up with a time that we all strive for. Now, what that does is it gives shift commanders and company officers something to train to evaluate how their company is doing in relation to the big picture. If they get a new member in the company, that's what they can use to train by and say, hey, this is the goal. And what it does, it unites the organization. But I think what we do a lot of times in the fire service, you know, the fire chief will say, hey, I'm at 30,000 feet, and go to the ops chief and say, hey, you're the ops chief. Figure out how we're going to do stuff. And the ops chief is like, man, I got to build stations and buy fire trucks and hire and fire. Then he goes to the shift commander and says, hey, you guys figure it out. And then the shift commander wants to be a servant leader and wants to empower his company officer. He goes, hey, you guys do it the way you want to do it. And then pretty soon we have as many different ways to operationally approach something as we do decision makers. And to me, when we do that, survivability then depends on what shift is on duty, the experience of the company officer, right on down the line. So, you know, people will say, well, every fire is different. Well, every flight is different. The age of the aircraft, the weather, the experience of the pilot. And they're one of the most checklist, standard-driven industries that I know about. And so, you know, I want standards because I want predictability and uniformity. I want to know that the person that lives in Station 5's district or with Truck 5 and Truck 1 are going to have the same chance of surviving, whether it's a medical call, a pin in a car accident, or a structure fire, regardless who's on duty and who gets there. And the only way that I know to do that is through standards. So we have preparedness standards, then we have our performance standards. So being prepared mentally, physically, mechanically, procedurally, performance standards, be able to do this in this much time. Our operational standards, all our fire operations are objective based. And so we either achieve the objective or we don't. If we don't achieve it, we have two choices. We either train differently or we modify the objective. There we go. So our operations are constantly in revision. And then leadership standards is I want anybody, certainly who is a formal leader, but everybody in the organization has some level of influence. I mean, that's what leadership is influence. If you're a good leader, it's a positive influence. If you're negative. So, I mean, I want them to understand their vision of success based on their level of the organization. I want them to understand the organization's core values and their personal core values, because that's part of how they lead. I want continuity in their leadership and their operational philosophy, so they're not sending different messages every day. And then finally, I want the leaders to have their priorities straight, so that no matter where you're working, if you're a firefighter working overtime or a captain that gets swung, we all understand what the priorities are, and we can all, as an organization, go out and focus on the mission with those core values and deliver a standard level. And that's why it becomes important is our citizens, I believe, deserve the same chance of surviving no matter where they are in our. Now, if a company's out of pocket and on another call, those are all things that we can't deal with. But if everybody's in the house, and I'm an 80-year-old lady, I should have the same chance of surviving no matter who's on duty, what shift is on, or where I live.
Absolutely, dude. I love it. I love it. That explains standards in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Questions. Fire Medic Barlow asked if he could ask questions. Absolutely, Fire Medic Barlow. If you have a question, type it up here. We will get to it if able. So feel free to type it up. But back to standards. Only way to, like, I love the way you lead off. Both presentations, I believe, you said, what is success? You know, how do you define success? Peppa. Sorry, my wife brought home a stray, and she's still fitting in. So she likes to make a little noise.
Well, good for you.
But no, defining success, and what does success look like? And without those standards, how can you even define it? And I love that. So moving on from standards to culture, the American Fire Service, organizational, sub, and micro. And I have some questions about, go ahead and talk about the culture. And we've touched on it somewhat, but I like the way you start at the macro and just come on in like a magnifying glass. So
I guess the best way to think about culture, it's how things get done. Okay. So we have those guidelines and procedures and policies, but we have a lot of routines and rituals and just the unwritten rules of kind of things, how things get done. So think of culture in that term. Well, there's a macro culture, which is occupational culture, which is the American Fire Service. And all our organizations, rather it be the speaking trumpets on our collar, the collar insignia, our rank structure, if we have bells on our rig, some of our terminology, those are all things that we adopt or we make part of our organizational culture. Now, the organizational culture is what sets departments apart. That's what makes, Moore, Oklahoma a little different from the Colony, Texas. Sure. And then under that, we have subcultures. Now, this is kind of where it's important. I mean, supervisors have a subculture. Senior men and women have a subculture. How to take care of business, how to do things, the routines, like I said, the rituals, the things that we do. So that's the next level. And that can be a shift, a battalion, supervisors, battalion chiefs have a subculture, company officers have a subculture, and then we get into the microcultures, the firehouse, the engine company, the truck company. If you've ever watched an episode of Chicago Fire, and I know this is reality even in Chicago, but the squad has a squad table out in the bay. That's part of that that micro culture that you know of that firehouse, and so those things. Now, the reason why it's important to understand those, because if you understand the different levels of culture, then you understand what influence you have on culture. If I'm a senior man in a firehouse, okay, I have a lot of influence on the microculture and to a degree the subculture. I may not have a lot of input on the organizational culture. That may be a little bigger than me.
Sure.
But I can certainly influence, and if I have this vision of success, and I want a certain chosen culture in my truck company or engine company or rescue or squad company or in my firehouse, I understand that I can do that and I can influence. So everybody in the organization influences the culture, and the culture influences everybody in the organization. It just kind of depends. You know, I say I'm a firefighter with fire chief's responsibilities. So I have a lot of influence on the organizational culture, right? My vision, my values are going to be, but going down to the firehouse, I mean, a strong leader, captain can have that. So that's why it's important to understand that. So you can have a chosen culture in a firehouse, or you can accept the culture that exists and hope it's a good one.
The accidental culture.
Exactly, the accidental culture.
What has been your biggest challenge? I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. Like basically personality, someone who doesn't like the change, doesn't like the direction. How do you tell someone to deal with something like that?
Well,
tips and tricks from Chief Thompson.
We got about 9 guys in our organization that could probably care less if I leave tomorrow. They probably trust me, but they don't really like me because they don't like change. You know, these are the ones who just don't like any authority in their life, and they want to do whatever they want to do. So, I mean, in the early days, I had to sell the culture basically one person at a time. And I would try to appeal to those strong leaders, those ones that have a greater influence. And I would spend a lot of time selling the culture. I can't tell it. I'd have to explain why it's going on and how it impacts the big picture of what we want to be and what their individual influence is. So the more of those people that I kind of get on board, and then they've got to understand it, I can't take any shortcuts, right. Then they'll start being an advocate for the process. They'll start selling the message. And then as we start to implement change, and everybody's got to have change, I kind of call it transitioning. You know, the Colony Fire Department could not survive if it was the same department 11 years ago as it is today. And we all have change in our lives, you know, family stuff. So once the organization starts to see that the change is paying off, or that the change work. I remember one of the first biggest changes I made was when we went from the Quint concept to the engine and truck deployment model. Well, right. Everybody said, hey man, that only works in New York City or Chicago. We're too small. Well, we trained on it. We learned it. I constantly had a consistent message of why we're doing it and what it should look like. And by golly, once fire started going good, they were kind of like, all right, this is working. And you couldn't pay somebody today in our organization to go back and go back to that way of doing things, because they've seen how it works. And that's for everything. Now, if things are going bad, the chief has to have such a position and say, okay, this didn't work. This isn't working. If I stick with a bad thing just because my ego doesn't want to allow me to say I was wrong, then that's what you said before. Now you've lost a whole lot of momentum, and the next change, the troops are going to be much more skeptical of, because they're there. So on the front end, I got to do a lot of homework. I've got to really, really listen and throw some information and see what kind of feedback I get. But for the guys who just don't buy in, you know, I've called them in my office, and everything I do is on my whiteboard in my office. And at the top it says, start with the end in mind and why. If not this, what? And I'll tell them, I've had this conversation. I'll say, there's 2 things I can't control: how much money you make and the number of fires we go to. Everything else we can talk about. So here's my blank whiteboard. You tell me what we can change today in the Colony Fire Department that's going to get you to buy in 50% more than you are today. How can I make this a little better? Well, they say, oh, everything's great, Chief. Well, that's not an organizational problem now. That's a personal problem. Now you got somebody who has no courage, they have no backbone, and they can't look another adult in the face and say, yeah, here's my problems, let's talk about them. And we may not agree on everything, but at least we know there's some problems.
Right.
But most of the guys now that are struggling, the ones that just, they're more interested in just going in and griping about things because that's where they get the greatest amount of attention. But we're getting now, I think some of our guys are getting tired of it and they're shutting it down in the Firehouse. So that number's coming down a little bit. But, you can only do so much. And I call it friction and company contribution. The reason why I want to minimize the friction in our Firehouse is because those people will contribute greater to the fire company, the small team. They will become more functional. It's not for me. It's so that we can come together as an organization with one mission, commit to those standards. Don't commit to the fire chief. Commit to the standards. I'll give you the things you need, and we can be the best version of ourselves while we're on duty. That's all. Nothing more, nothing less.
I love it, man. I love it. The Crew First Culture said, thank you for, well, it went away. He said, thank you for expressing how important it is to take care of your department members first. We need more chief officers who believe in that. And I have to completely agree because it can be very frustrating. I know I'm blessed to come from a great department with great administration. So,
and I know your chief, and he seems like a great guy.
Yes, and so I don't want to ever come across like that's what. But I do talk to a lot of guys from. And I know you have 190 different Bloomberg-sized departments, I believe. So I want so many. I got to figure. I got to focus. Engine and truck deployment model.
Take your time.
What is your typical house fire, Fox box? What is your deployment model? Kind of run through it if you don't mind.
Okay, well, we have to rely some on mutual aid, but since we just opened this fourth station, now this is across the board. This is going to happen unless somebody gets on the radio and says, I'm calling an audible. Okay. We're going to dispatch 4 engines, a truck, which is a 5-person truck, so it'll respond as a tower ladder with the rescue attached to it, a battalion chief, and an ambulance. So that's our standard for a 1-alarm structure fire in a residential structure. So the first engine on, and we use this terminology, their job is to address fire attack. Now, the company decides how to do that, if it's going to take 1 3/4, a water can, a 2.5, a deck gun. But their job is to address fire attack. The second engine on, their job is what we call the fire attack support team. Their whole job is to see to the success of the first engine company. They establish a water supply, and then that officer addresses, does that company have to be on that line with the first crew to help them advance it? Do they protect the stairs? Do they pull a backup line, a secondary line, an exposure line, or a block line? That's what they got to consider. The third engine on becomes our initial rapid intervention team. The second engine functions at the initial rapid intervention. Third engine's a rapid intervention team. Now, the fourth engine we got coming mutual aid because we just went through our 3 engine. One of our engines is a squad. They can do engine or truck work. And then the fourth engine on is our tactical reserve. If the tactical reserve is assigned before we go under control, that's the standard for calling a second alarm. So if we haven't gone under control, the tactical reserve is assigned, we go to a second alarm. Okay, the truck gets on scene, 5-person truck. The driver of the truck and the firefighter of the truck are the outside truck, and they address all things outside. Forcible entry, ventilation, whatever the outside, are they going to put the tower ladder in service?
Almost an OVM team?
No, I've got an OC, an outside control.
Okay,
that's not them. They're just called the outside truck. Now, the captain of the truck is we used to call him the outside vent, the OV. We now call him the outside control. Okay. Because sometimes it's more about closing the building. So he or she is part of that outside team, but they work independently. So the outside controls job is to get opposite a fire attack. Wherever fire attack is going in, the OC is on the other side. And his or her job is, it's the eyes and ears of the incident commander to initiate vent enter search, because it's our truck captain, it's our most experienced truck guy. And then what we say to soften the back in case the interior crews have to come out the back and address utilities.
Okay.
The other two members of the truck, which is made up of a driver and a firefighter on the rescue, they're the inside truck. So they do search, overhaul, salvage. So that's what happens on every fire. The battalion chief comes in, takes command. Our medical is there to address, you know, any
Rehab
injuries
as needed, yes.
Any of that stuff.
So you say your truck is a truck and a rescue? Is it two separate?
Well, yeah, the only way I could get my 5-person truck company was to go to my boss and say, listen, if we put them in a separate vehicle, we're going to save wear and tear on the tower ladder, and they can be another response vehicle. So on any given day, I have an officer assigned to the truck and 2 drivers. One's driving the tower ladder, and one is the officer on the rescue.
Okay.
And then 2 firefighters.
Very nice. Very nice. Awesome, man. I could talk about that stuff too all day.
Yeah. And then when the word working fire, when the first on says we have a working fire in such and such, then that triggers a few more things. We get another medic to the scene, air and light come, and then from there it's just a matter of going to the next alarm.
Nice. Fire medic Barlow says, I am just starting to mentor the new recruits. What is the single most important thing to remember when making the transition to that mentor, and how do I make myself a solid mentor?
Wow. Okay. That's a great question. You know, I'm a huge fan of mentoring. I think it's the future of fire service leadership and learning. The first thing I'm going to say is knowledge, man. You know, you can only do so much to gain experience, going to training, going to fires. But having that solid base of experience and knowledge, and make sure it's the right knowledge. Knowledge about the job, you know, how to force a door, how to pull a line, but also knowledge about the organization. What the learner, I call them mentors and learners. I hate the word mentee, but
okay.
Coaching is about the here and now. You're doing this right, you're doing it wrong, providing immediate feedback. And that's a component of mentoring. But mentoring is really about positioning people for future success. So you got to understand the job, you got to understand the organization, and you got to understand people. So knowledge base, insight, understanding, knowing the why is the most important. The second most important thing, it's kind of twofold. It's a commitment to learning about the person that you're mentoring,
Nice.
What motivates them, what their goals are, so forth. And then being committed to their success, being patient. Everybody learns a little differently. They're not going to learn as fast. What you don't want is the mentor getting frustrating and giving up. So know the job so you have the tools to provide information, both immediately and long term, and then make the commitment to that individual to say, I'm going to be committed to your learning. I'm going to be committed to your success. I'm going to be patient. And we're going to do this together. And to me, that's what mentoring is you can't make it about you. You're not there to tell them how great you are and all the great. Now, there's value in stories and share your stories, and that's part of it. But it should always end up, this is how my story, my experiences should help you in life and in this job.
Wow. Competence and learning, and then committed and have that relationship built with them, the patience to stick it through. That's awesome, Chief.
You know, and if you just remember competence and commitment when it comes to mentoring, you're going to be okay. And hopefully you've got good character. We're going to assume that you're basically a good person. You know, that you're not the person that's going out there and say, hey, this captain's a jackass, you know, and
right.
you gotta be an advocate for the process. You gotta believe, and you gotta want to make people want to learn, want to be successful. figure out what motivates them. And man, I just, a good modern mentoring program solves a million problems. And it also expedites the chosen culture, because now you have advocates for the process, and they understand what the chosen culture looks like, and they go out and they can be the person who helps people transition into this culture.
Wow. Oh, that's powerful. I love it. And that's the thing, man. It's like it's like when you have a mentoring program but no deliberate culture, it's just kind of wandering out there like no standards.
Well, there's two reasons why formal mentoring programs fail. Number one, the chief doesn't support it. So it's the kind of the program of the week. And, the firehouse can be an ugly place. So now this young firefighter wants to be a mentor, and they have a learner there, and the whole company's like, yeah, we ain't doing that. You're not throwing ladders today. You're not pulling hose. That's only going to happen so many times before everybody's going to check out. So it's got to come from the chief. The chief has got to say, this is important. We're going to do this the right way, and stay committed to that. That's the number one reason why they fail. The second reason is the mentor doesn't have the tools, enough institutional knowledge to be able to guide that person day by day or week by week. You remember I said it's about positioning for future success. So the mentor's got to know what now success looks like and what future success looks like. And if you don't know those things, then you're just having conversations every day, which there's value in that.
There was a part where you talked about the strong company officer can make a microculture kind of appear, spin up, even though the deliberate culture isn't there. And you have those pockets inside organizations. I love that part because I've seen that in my own career happen and stuff like that. But I want to get to, before we run out of time, I always go over a book that firefighters should read when we have the scrap, and I always give the guest a chance to suggest a book that's had an impact on their life that they think firefighters should read. So go for it, Chief. Which book would you suggest to people, or books for that matter? So.
Probably this one, Going Pro by Tony Kearns. This was given to me by Gordon Graham, and it's a very good one. Another one, and I know Brian Brush and I agree on this one, it's Deep Survival by Lawrence Gonzalez. Who lives and who dies and why? Right. So if you're a firefighter and you're wanting just some round stuff, Going Pro, Deep Survival. Now, if you're into cultural stuff and you want to learn that, this is Leading by Cultural Intelligence. And there's some very good culture books out there, and there's some really crappy ones. This one is by Livermore, David Livermore. This is a good one to kind of get your feet wet about cultural things and leadership. And then I'm going to show you one more. Now, if you really want to get in deep to positioning people for success and survival, here is The Laws of Human Nature. This is really good. This is kind of like one of my leadership Bibles. This is probably one of the best books, and this is by Robert Greene. Probably one of the best. It's the 48 Laws of Power. This has probably helped me understand people more. It goes way beyond the obvious. I mean, you can pick up a bunch of books this big that's going to give you a basic definition of leadership. It's going to list off 97 traits and all the things that we hear all the time. But this really gets into and then anything about the science of performance. Not just neat tales of there's some value to that. Great stuff by Navy SEAL and all those things, but there's a huge science involved in performance. And so when we talk about standards, and standards are based on performance, if we understand the science of how people learn to perform, that's going to help us as mentors and leaders, help them be successful in meeting those standards.
Awesome, dude. I got a stack of books that I'm behind in my reading, because every time I do one of these, I get someone suggests a great book. I'm so far behind. And then you say,
I'm the same way.
I got to get The Laws of Human Nature. I have Deep Survival and Going Pro, and I got Going Pro.
The problem is, look at how that's a thick.
I saw that. I was like, oh no. So.
But
No, yeah, going
And
pro.
this one, you can see mine's like yours. You can see all the
Yes.
tabs there. I don't know all the anyway. So yeah, those are just. I mean, I could give you a bunch more, but to get started, you know, those are kind of good. Deep Survival's a great one, like I say, by Lawrence Gonzalez. I go back to that one a bunch. And I think and I know we're on time,
No,
but
you're
I
good.
think also anything that you can read about mental imagery and mental mapping in a performance profession. So mental imagery is how, as mentors, as senior members, leaders, it's the images that we create in those that we influence is head. Okay. So that's got to be accurate, right? The standard, we got to create an image. And then mental mapping, this is real important for senior men and women and leaders, is that's how you connect the dots and make the information, the knowledge usable. It's huge for tactical leadership, helping us be high performers in chaotic, crazy environment that we work in. So anything about those is valuable reading.
Mental imagery, mental mapping. Okay.
And there's some other words for that, you know, that they kind of play with
Sure.
those words. You know, everybody coins a new term, but that's what I would recommend reading. Why? But read, even if you're reading just read, you got to be a reader. One more thing that I fear. Can I throw in one more thing?
Go, Chief.
This is the next problem that the fire service is going to have to deal with, and I'm seeing signs all the time. Right now, if you're a motivated firefighter, there's a ton of good books to read. There's great podcasts all the time, depending on what you're thinking. But you can go just about any weekend to some part of this country and be influenced both from a knowledge standpoint and a skill standpoint by the best in the business, and usually in small groups and get a lot of sets and reps. So you have a generation that can take advantage of that. Now, if those people come back to their firehouse and in their fire company, if the senior man or woman and the company officer reject that information, hey, we don't do it like that, I don't want to hear about it, blah, 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 that's where the problem, the friction starts. And I see the day pretty soon where the senior man and woman and the company officer, they may be the most experienced in the company, but they're the dumbest when it comes to modern knowledge and skills. And when that happens in the firehouse, now you have separation. There's going to be resentment. And the other members that are watching, they're going to see this, and I won't call him a young firefighter, they're going to see this motivated firefighter who just learned forcible entry from Sammy Hiddle. And they're going, hey, this guy knows what he's doing. So they're going to start watching, and there's going to be a natural attraction because people want to surround themselves with people that are being successful. And the part of the company that doesn't follow, man, then the senior man or woman and the company officers lost the firehouse. And we're going to see, because there's so many opportunities now, not only to gain knowledge, but to really gain skill proficiency. And if the company officer doesn't welcome that and say, hey, listen, I can't go to all these conferences or choose not to, but you teach me, help me learn what you now know. If they don't do that, that's going to be a huge problem for fire chiefs, battalion chiefs to manage. And it's coming.
So your answer to that, of course, is you come from the top down with the whole embracing of that, basically, and try to infect your company officers and your senior men with that mentality.
And also, and I stopped going to fire chief conferences several years ago, and all I do are go to firefighter conferences now because I want to see how my firefighters are being influenced. And I feel I've got to understand things, not at the technique level, not at the task level, but certainly at the tactics level, and talk the talk. And so we make it very clear, our culture is a chosen learning culture. So our culture values learning and quality daily training as one of the top things. And that's why we've had success. And we truly have an organization now where the organization has embraced training and learning, and they just do it on their own. That's awesome. So hopefully we've gotten ahead of that.
It ties right into your saying of you're just a firefighter who has fire chief responsibilities.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah,
walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Well, I'm trying. I get it wrong a lot of times, but there's so many easy things that I can do to support my guys. That's one of them. You know, listening is one of them, reading, understanding, and just not, just not making this any harder than it has to be.
That is awesome. Chief, I hope I've had a blast, first of all. I got about
So did I.
10% of my questions, and I've forgotten most of them.
It went by fast.
No doubt.
It went by fast.
I hope you will come back and speak again sometime in the future. I had a blast. Thank you for coming on. As always, it's a pleasure talking to you. Everybody that came in and watched, I hope you enjoy. If you have questions, put them in the comments, and me and Chief Thompson will get to them. And other than that, I hope the tone stays silent for everybody. Unless it's burning, stay safe out there. Thank you, Chief.
Thanks.